This morning we begin a new church year. First Sunday of Advent is when the church has their New Year's party. And Advent is a season that gets us ready for the incarnation at Christmas, a time of preparation, a time of expectation. Some of us may measure the days with an Advent calendar at home. Some of us will come to church each Sunday to watch us measure those weeks with our Advent wreath. But there's no difference about how we measure this time. The commonality is that we are all preparing for the coming of Christ in the world, preparing for Christmas Day. Now, the first Sunday of Advent is always marked with a gospel text that is eschatological. It's one of my favorite theology words. Eschatology means about the end time, and that eschatology that we hear today in the gospel lesson is a bit intense. You get a little fire and brimstone, and it makes me want to sort of be fiery. But those of you who know me well know that I'm mostly sunshine and rainbows. So you're not going to get too much fire and brimstone this morning, but we are going to get a little bit of it, because Advent really marks the end of an old order and the beginning of a new order. In other words, we are living in an in-between time. Jesus has come and has started something new. But as our gospel lesson hints at today, there is an end coming as well. And whatever that beginning and end might be, we are in the middle of it. We are in that in-between time. And that calls us to a particular way of living. Now, our gospel lesson is quite colorful today. We start off with the story of the flood. Noah, as a righteous man, is able to survive a flood that wipes out all of the other people. But the story does not focus on Noah's righteousness. Instead, it focuses on everyone else that was there. Right? Saying easy things like people were eating and drinking. They were marrying and giving away in marriage. These are normal things, not to be read as something like drunkenness or gluttony or doing anything improper. These are just normal people, right? Eating and drinking, like we just did for Thanksgiving. Marrying, giving away in marriage, which means they believe there is some future coming. But that future did not come for them. For we know in that story, the flood wiped them all away. Then we get another bit of story in this gospel lesson where there are people, again, doing normal things. Pairs of people when one is taken and the other is left. Now, the end of times is usually about judgment. And most Christians land on one of three different ways to understand those end-time judgment periods. The first is perhaps what we might know best in popular culture. That is that apocalyptic kind of end of times. When we have stories of the rapture, right? I love those Left Behind stories because it dramatizes that kind of rapture moment, where someone is taken and someone is left, and then left on earth basically to deal with all of the terrible things. That kind of understanding of an apocalyptic end is quite dramatic, makes for a good movie, but is probably not exactly the way that we land as Anglicans. A second line of thinking about the end time or that judgment period is that it is really individual, and that at the end of every life, there is a moment of judgment. Where that comes into play for us is that we don't really know when the end of our life will be, and so we are called to be prepared for the end, for our death, in that moment of judgment. That makes sense probably to many of us, but I have to offer a third way of understanding the preparation that Advent invites us into, and that is that we do not have that moment of judgment at the end of life or in some apocalyptic vision, but rather, every day we are invited into a period where we have a choice to make about how we live. Every day We are invited to confront God's radical, inclusive love that changes the way we live if we let it. Every day, we are invited into a moment when we have the decision to make about how we're going to live today, not sometime in the future. Every day, we are offered a chance to change the way we live, to expect something different about life, and to love like Christ. Expectations are very important. Expectations change the way we live in radical ways. Stephen Hawking is an astrophysicist at Cambridge University that most of you likely know. He's advanced the general theory of relativity probably more than anyone since Einstein, and many argue that he could be the smartest person alive. But as many of you know, Hawking is afflicted with ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease, which has confined him to a wheelchair. He can basically not move at all. He's continued in this wheelchair for years, and being confined without any movement, even the capacity to speak on his own, has given him the opportunity to sit and think. Hawking said before he became ill, he had very little interest in life, that he called it a pointless existence. He drank too much, he never really did much work. But when he discovered that he was sick, when he was told that he only had months to live, everything changed. Beyond the initial shock of the diagnosis, he became surprisingly happy. He claimed that he was happier after his diagnosis than he had ever been beforehand. He said in an interview, "When one's expectations are reduced to nothing, then one appreciates every single thing." Stated another way, part of the contentment in life is our expectations of what life will provide. To a man like Hawking, who thought he would die very soon, every little thing began to take on special meaning. Every little sunrise or walk in the park or hearing his children laugh, everything became precious. By contrast, those of us who expect a lot out of life, perhaps a free ride or at least a really good one, are often displeased with even the finest things in front of us. Expectations change everything. So back to Advent. Advent is really a season of expectation, a season where not only we prepare for Christmas, which sounds a little, esoteric and theoretical. So instead, how about we work to change what we expect out of our life? That season of expectation is an invitation for us to actually begin to mold our lives so that every day we respond to God with real, tangible action. Can we dream in the face of uncertainty? Can we dare to hope when things seem rough? Can we choose to love every person, even though we may be afraid? If Advent teaches us anything, it teaches us to listen to God speaking to us, to listen to Christ in our hearts and minds, working through us in the world. Christ is that voice of truth, telling us what is real and what is not. Over this next month, we will have so many opportunities to find ourselves trapped in whatever kind of construct the world gives us. We are expected to buy a lot, to go to lots of parties, to just be busy and busy and busy, and all of a sudden, by the time Christmas comes, we're relieved that it is finally over. Instead, could we make a choice now before that train leaves the station to limit what the world demands of us, to limit everything that is material, and to change our expectations so that we expect not stuff, but God. We expect Christ, not in words, but inside our hearts, where we expect that God will be present to each and every one of us, present in the way that we live and present in the way that we love one another. This Advent, I invite you to change the way you expect life will be. And when we do so, when we really listen to that voice of truth that speaks to us every day, I think we will be very excited and surprised at what we hear. Amen.